The title of my message this evening is The Challenge of Islam, Jihad, and the Gospel. Now, as a background, as we look at I teach a course on Islam at the Criswell College in Dallas. It's one of my many part-time hats that I wear, jobs that I do. I'm adjunct professor at Criswell College. I teach a course on Islam. And the challenge I have this evening is to try to compress down into the next few minutes that we have what I would normally cover in the first 2 weeks of the course. So I know you'll bear with me. I'm going to have to talk fast this evening. And for those of you, I encourage you to take notes, fill in those blanks as you go along, and order the CD from the night or the DVD, because it has two features I don't have: pause and rewind. I will not have time for either one of those. But to give some context, before we look at Islam, I want to give some context. It's a prophecy conference. And as you go through the prophetic scriptures, you will notice a theme, a principle throughout most of the prophetic literature when it discusses the end times and the last days, and that is there's going to be a time of deception. A theme that you'll find in almost all the passages dealing with the end times is going to be marked. You can put it down scripturally. It's going to be a time of deception. It's going to be a time of apostasy. In the Olivet Discourse, Jesus discusses this, and if you'll turn to Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 4, I'll just share a couple of passages with you. And Jesus, Matthew 24, verse 4, "And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you." Now notice it's going to be the end times, or it's going to be a time of deception. We have to purpose amongst ourselves. We have to take heed that no man deceive you. Verse 5, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." It's going to be a time of counterfeit Christs, of alternative Christ, ultimately culminated in the Antichrist. But as we see in 1 John, even in the first century, the spirit of Antichrist is already with us. Verse 11, skipping down. "And many false prophets shall come and shall rise and shall deceive many." It's going to be a time of many prophets in the land, many false prophets. Verse 23, skipping down. "Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not." Verse 24, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect." Now, the underlying Greek there implies that it is possible, that the deception is going to be so strong, and it's going to lead to not just deception amongst the lost, but an apostasy within Christianity as well, deceive, if possible, the very elect. And so as we see the religious landscape, we're seeing this escalating in recent years. The tremendous amount of new religious movements and prophets that are rising up. Have you noticed that? I recently wrote a book called The Concise Guide to Today's Religions and Spirituality with the help of my staff. We worked over 10 years on this project. We went through every one of our files at Watchman Fellowship and at our headquarters in Arlington, Texas, and we put together the key facts on over 1,700 cults, occult groups, world religions, Christian denominations, churches, controversial doctrines, practices, spiritual leaders. 1,700. It is multiplying, snowballing. 1,700. Just so you'll know what's out there, what you really need to know about. For the remainder of my time this evening, I'd like to read you the 1,700. I'm not going to do that. But one of the common themes that you're going to find throughout is the question, the issue, who is Jesus? Now, students of prophecy, we're always wanting to know, we're looking for, to find scriptural hints, looking at the news, to find the possible identity of the coming Antichrist. But interestingly, as you go through the prophetic scriptures, there seems to be more an emphasis not on identifying who is the Antichrist, but correctly identifying who is the Christ, who is Jesus. The best way to recognize any counterfeit is by knowing the genuine. And as you go through the book and look at all the counterfeit religions out there, none of them are going to say, we hate Jesus. They believe in Jesus, they follow Jesus, but the real question becomes, which Jesus? You see, if anything that is of value, there are going to be counterfeits. There are going to be ripoffs. There are going to be fakes out there. Anything, think about that. Anything that's value. I had somebody ask me recently as they thumb through the book, James, why are there so many other Jesuses out there? I said, because of the value of the true Jesus. Anything with value, or there are going to be imitations. There are going to be impersonators, knockoffs. For example, think of something of value, a diamond. Diamond's the most precious stone because of its value. There are obviously going to be fake diamonds. Am I right? You know, they call them the cubic, what do they call them? Yeah, cubic zirconiums. The pearl, a most precious thing, the pearl, beauty, value, because of its value and beauty, because it's so precious. There are fake pearls. Now, I'm not really quite sure. Maybe you can help me on this. Is a cultured pearl, is that a fake pearl or a real pearl? I'm not sure, but I know the plastic ones. Now, I'm positive on that. You got a fake on your hands. The Rolex watch, I'm told, is the most counterfeited watch in the history of the world. Why? Because it's valuable. It's precious. There's going to be counterfeits. Now, notice this. I have never seen a counterfeit Timex watch. There's a reason for that. That's all I'm saying. So it's going to come down, as you look at the religion, as we look at Islam tonight, it's really going to come down to not do you believe in Jesus, but who is Jesus? Think about this. Jesus never asked his followers, hey fellas, do people believe I exist? That was never the question. Turn, if you will, with me to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16, beginning in verse 13. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Now, you're going to find this. None of the religions are going to say they hate Jesus. They believe in Jesus. They follow Jesus. But the question becomes not, do you believe in Jesus, or did Jesus exist? But as Jesus said, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Verse 14, and they said to him, now, this is interesting, some say thou art John the Baptist. John the Baptist has come back. Some, Elias, and others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. It's interesting, the religions, they'll say, oh, Jesus was a great man. Jesus was a teacher. Jesus was one of the prophets. We're going to see this evening. Islam respects Jesus. Jesus, they said, was one of the prophets. But that's not the correct answer. Verse 15, he said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? See, that's the question. Verse 16, and Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, let me say this evening right up front that no devout Muslim can make the confession that Peter just made. With all their respect of Jesus, Isa, they cannot confess that Jesus is the Son of God. You know, I talk about the counterfeits out there and the fakes. It's true for diamonds. It's true for pearls. It's true for Rolexes. But you know, it's always going to be true for the king. No, not that king. I'm talking about the other king, Elvis Presley. Now, I got this illustration from my own pastor. I didn't know this. My pastor shared with me that in 1977, when Elvis Presley died, did you know that there were 1,300 registered Elvis impersonators? 1,300. Elvis Presley died in 1977, but that was 1977. 30 years later, in 2007, there were 85,000 registered Elvis impersonators. There's skydiving Elvises, scuba diving Elvises. You've seen Vegas, you could probably populate a small town with just Elvis impersonators. 85,000 registered. Now that doesn't include all those undocumented Elvis impersonators. 85,000. My pastor said it's so bad, James, experts are now saying by the year 2020, at that rate of growth, 1 in 3 Americans be registered Elvis impersonators. Well, if you impersonate Elvis, if you have a wrong Elvis, it's no big deal. But my friend, if you've got the wrong Jesus, it is a deadly case of mistaken identity. Let me talk about Islam, and it comes down to who is Jesus. If you look at your outline, we're going to talk about the definition of Islam, and we're already going to start with some controversy. You'll hear it said, well, the word Islam actually means peace. It's the religion of peace. And while you could make the case that it could lead to a type of peace, that's not the real meaning of the word. Now, it's true that the consonants of the Arabic word Islam, you have the consonants S-L-M. In Semitic language, you'll find the parallel in the Hebrew word shalom with the same consonants, S-L-M. But Islam does not mean peace. It means actually submission. It means to submit to Allah, submit to God. Or if it has an idea of peace, it means peace through submission to Allah, or peace with God. B in your outline, one who submits to Allah is a Muslim. Now, again, in the word Muslim, you'll find those same consonants, S-L-M. Well, in the English language, when you add an ER suffix on the end of a verb, it means one who does that. So a run, the verb run, you put an ER on the end, you have a runner. In Arabic, if you put the MU prefix, you have the same effect. So you have Islam, submission to God. A Muslim is one who submits to God. Now, if you look up in the encyclopedia, it'll tell you that Islam began in roughly around 610 A.D. in near present-day Mecca, present-day Saudi Arabia, when Muhammad went out to the cave of Hira near Mecca and heard the voice, what he later claimed was the voice of the angel Gabriel, telling him to recite, and he began to recite the Quran, what later became the Quran, and that was the beginning of the religion called Islam. But Muslims will disagree with that. They'll say that anyone historically who is submitted to Allah, to God, is a Muslim. So all the prophets in the Bible, all the people of God, even before Muhammad, were Muslims. They would say that Isaac, Jacob, Abraham, all Muslims. Jesus was a Muslim, they will say. Adam was the first Muslim. So Islam goes all the way back to the beginning. They'll go further than that. They'll say a Muslim, they'll say, actually, you were Muslim. All of us, whether you're Christian, Jew, or atheist, all of us, they say, we're born Muslim. But then something went wrong. We began to be deceived by our surroundings or by our parents or by our religious institutions. And so we became Jews, or we became Christians, or we became atheists, but we were born Muslim. And so they would say when you convert to Islam, they don't even like to say you convert. They say you revert. You go back to being Muslim again. Well, if you're taking notes, there are approximately, some estimates, 1.8 billion, with a B, billion Muslims in the world. Which makes it the second largest religion in the world. Christianity is larger, but Islam is growing much more quickly right now worldwide. Some estimates is will overtake in the next several decades Christianity. And when it says 33% Christianity, Islam 21%, you have to understand that the 33% Christianity includes anything that calls itself Christian. So that would be evangelical, fundamental, it would be Protestant, liberal Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, Mormon, anything that calls itself Christian to get to the 33%. But again, Islam is growing much more rapidly. Let me talk about in the United States. Between the years 1990 and 2004, 1990 to 2004, Islam has grown by 109% in the United States. 109%. Now, everything, again, that calls itself Christian in the United States has grown by 5% during that same time period. Islam is growing tremendously, not just around the world, but yes, here in the United States as well. There are several reasons for the growth here in the United States. One of them is birth rates. Studies have been done that Muslims will typically have many more children than non-Muslims. So biologically, there's a lot of growth with Islam. Also in the United States, there's immigration from predominantly Muslim countries. Many coming to the United States to take advantage of our university college systems or for business opportunities. So it's growing by immigration. I have a theory about that. Why are so many Muslims moving to the United States from predominantly Islamic countries? Now, I may offend some here, but I have a theory that maybe one of the reasons is that we as the church have failed in our responsibility to send missionaries to the Muslim countries. So God is sending the Muslim to us and says, okay, now that he's your next door neighbor, she works next to you at work, now will you share my gospel with them, with the Muslim? He's bringing them to us. What a great opportunity. But another reason that Islam is growing in America is by conversion. People from even Christian backgrounds are becoming Muslim. Let me tell you about my friend Khalil Meek. Khalil Meek is the president of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, the only group, organization like it here in North America. It actually raises money and defends Islamic, the human rights and legal rights of Muslims throughout the United States. 501c3 organization. Khalil travels all over the United States defending the right. Interestingly, the rights he's defending in our country for Muslims, we would never have anything nearly those rights when we go to an Islamic country, a predominant Muslim country. But he's a friend of mine. I have known him and been working with him for several years now. Khalil Meek is not from Saudi Arabia. He's not from Pakistan. Khalil Meek is from Texas. Khalil Meek was raised in the Baptist church. In fact, he believed that God was calling him to be a Baptist pastor. And in college, he was preparing to become a student at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, when his friend, his roommate in college, gave him a Quran, Muslim, and challenged him to read the Quran. He read the Quran and converted to Islam. He's now the president of the Muslim Legal Fund of America. I've spent many hours talking with Khalil. In fact, just earlier this year, I did a 2-hour debate with Khalil Meek, head-to-head, on the issues, Jesus, the cross, and the resurrection. In fact, this is the first time we've been able to offer that. We just got it back. But we have the DVD, 2-hour debate that I did with Khalil Meek, Jesus, the cross, and the resurrection. And there's a bonus disc in there with 2 more teachings. We have a downloadable booklet that goes with that. Fascinating to talk with Khalil. Khalil is a case story of what's happened multiplied thousands of times, and that is conversion to Islam. Well, D, in your outline, approximately 90% of Muslims are Sunni. The word Sunni means the path. However, early in the history of Islam, shortly after the death of Muhammad, there was a big schism, a division amongst the Muslim people on who should be the ordained of Allah leader of the people of Allah, of the Muslim people. And so the majority went with the Sunni, and they followed after what they called the 4 rightly guided caliphs. However, a minority split off and became the Shia. The word Shia means party of Ali. And they did not recognize 3 of the 4 rightly guided caliphs and looked solely to Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, to be the rightful leader of the people of Allah. Now, that's the 90% Sunni, 9% Shia, so it leaves out some. Well, there's other groups out there as well. Sufis, for example. Sufism is a mystical form of Islam. The Ahmadiyya movement, interesting movement within Islam. These are the only Muslims that believe that Jesus actually made it to the cross, the Ahmadiyya Muslims. And another group would be the Nation of Islam. This is a sect or cult of Islam that sprang out of the United States. Very racist in their doctrines and their beliefs. They believe that God came to the United States in the person of a black man, Wallace D. Fard, and Malcolm X, you may remember in the 1960s, was an early leader in the Nation of Islam before he defected toward a more traditional Islam. Louis Farrakhan, of course, is the leader today of the Nation of Islam, very racist. But what I'm going to be sharing this evening are what Muslims believe. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be saying will apply to all Muslims, but some of it will only apply to the Sunni, the majority of Muslims that we will be talking about. Well, what Muslims believe. The most important doctrine I believe on Islam is the doctrine that Allah is one. Allah is one. This is the doctrine they call Tawhid. Tawhid teaches that God is Unitarian, not Trinitarian. God is one person, and God is totally separate from all of creation. There is God, and then there's everything else. And God cannot be connected with or have partnership or be in relationship with anything that's in creation. You cannot compare Allah, God, with creation. Or as my friend Khalil Meek likes to say, if you can touch it, taste it, feel it, smell it, it's not Allah. It must be God is one, which leads us to be in your outline, the greatest sin of Islam is the sin of shirk. The sin of shirk is ascribing any kind of connection or partnership or relationship of God with creation. That's why no Muslim can do the confession of Peter that Jesus is the Son of the living God, because Allah, God, cannot have a son. He cannot have a son, nor can he be a son, because that would imply partnership or connection or relationship. Allah must be separate. So no Muslim can say that Jesus is the Son of God. No Muslim can say that God is the Father, because again, that implies relationship or partnership that cannot exist. Allah must be separate totally from His creation. Allah is one, the sin of shirk. See, Allah has 99 names. Let me say on this, of course, Allah is the most common name. And if you look in the Arabic New Testament, the New Testament is translated in Arabic, you'll see the word Allah is used every place the word God is found in our Bible. And this has led to some confusion on the part of some Christians. And they have assumed that because Islam is a monotheistic religion and Christianity is a monotheistic religion, and they call God Allah, and that is a word that's used for God in the Arabic New Testament, then that means that Muslims and Christians are worshiping the same God, just in a different way. That is not true. Allah is a word that can be used for God, and it's okay to use that as a word for God. The New Testament uses it in Arabic translations. But like our English word God, the context is king. So in our English Bible, the word God can be talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or it can be saying the God of this world. Same word God, but the context tells you who it's talking about. One of the things I want to make sure everyone walks out of here knowing, Muslims do not believe in the same God that we do. We have things in common with Muslims, that we can use this to build a bridge, but we're not worshiping the same God in different ways. No Muslim will confess that Jesus is the Father, that Jesus has a son, or that God is the Father or has a Son, Jesus Christ. The 99 names, which you'll find in the Quran, are basically the attributes of Allah, attributes of God. God the merciful, God the all-powerful, God the all-knowing. There are 99 names for Allah. Actually, Muslims will tell you there's really 100 names for Allah. But the 100th name, only the camel knows. So we can know the 99 names for God, His attributes. Jesus and Isa. Muslims do believe in Jesus. In fact, they have a tremendous respect for Jesus. They believe in the last days. They believe in the judgment. They believe in heaven and hell. And they believe in all the prophets, including Jesus, not just Muhammad. Muhammad is the final prophet, but Jesus was one of the prophets they have respect. In fact, they'll go beyond respect. Muslims will say that Jesus' birth was prophesied by the other prophets, and they'll go so far as to say that Jesus was born of a virgin. They believe in the virgin birth, and they will acknowledge that Jesus is Messiah. Again, this can lead to some confusion. So they believe in Jesus the same as we do. They just spell the name differently, Isa instead of Jesus. No, while there are some similarities, and this is good because it gives us some common ground that we can build a relationship and talk about Jesus, Jesus and Isa are not the same. Jesus is not Isa. Isa is not Jesus. They will say that Jesus is not the second person of the Trinity. He's not God in the flesh. Their Jesus, while he was the Messiah, they believe he did not die on the cross. He never rose bodily from the dead. Well, what happened on that? In fact, we have an interesting part of the debate. When we're talking about Jesus, the cross, and the resurrection, I asked Khalil, what happened to Jesus? Well, there's theories that came. The Quran doesn't really actually say what happened. The Quran simply says they crucified him not. That they thought they had crucified him, but they crucified him not. Any other talk leads to speculation. So what happened to Jesus? Well, after the death of Muhammad, there were several Muslim leaders in the couple of hundred years afterwards that came up with theories about it. You may have heard of some of these theories. Some believe that Jesus was headed to the cross, but on the way to the cross, there was a substitute. Some would say that Simon of Cyrene was the substitute. He carried the cross of Jesus. The Roman guards were confused. They said, let's crucify him. There's the one holding the cross, and they crucified the wrong one. Allah protected Jesus to make sure that someone else, as a substitute, was put on the cross. But that's not the majority opinion. Most Muslims today believe it was not Simon of Cyrene who died on the cross. It was actually Judas Iscariot. They believe it was Judas who was given as a substitute for Jesus, and it was Judas who died on the cross. One of the points that I brought out in the debate with Khalil Meek is, okay, if a substitute, if you want to go with the stunt double theory, If it was someone else who died in Jesus' place on the cross, what happened to the body? Well, the Muslim will say, well, it wasn't the body of Jesus. Jesus was taken up into heaven. It was someone else's body, but the tomb was empty. If it was someone else, where's the body of the substitute? But the disciples, Mary found the tomb to be empty, Jesus and Isa. The Quran alone is trustworthy. Now, the Muslims do believe in the Bible in a sense. They believe especially in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, as being from Allah, from God. They believe in the Psalms of David. They believe in the gospel of Jesus. However, they believe that over the years, the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, that they changed the Bible. They took out things. They corrupted the Bible so that the Bible we have today is not trustworthy. That's why that Allah sent the angel Gabriel to give the Quran by recitation to Muhammad in the cave of Hira initially. And over a number of years, he would hear from the angel. Now, interestingly, according to Hadith, which is the traditions of the sayings and deeds of Muhammad, recited by his companions, that when initially he heard the voice of the angel Gabriel, he thought it was something evil. But his wife Khadijah convinced him that this was not the case, and so he opened himself up and he began to get these revelations from the angel Gabriel, basically saying to recite. And so they would recite the Quran, and initially it was simply through oral tradition. And it's roughly the size of our New Testament, and there were a number of people who had memorized the entire Quran, could recite the entire Quran, and only it is trustworthy. They believe that it must be burnt. It was burned by Uthman. Now, what happened is early on, the Quran was in jeopardy, because what happened was it was pretty much through recitation only that it was preserved and passed on from one Muslim to the other. And there were reciters of the entire Quran, but a number of them, a frightening percentage of them, were killed in several battles, especially the Battle of Yamama. And upon the death of these reciters of the Quran, there was concern that all the people who memorized the Quran would be killed in battle, and then we would lose the Quran. And so the first rightly guided caliph, and followed by the third rightly guided caliph, Uthman, put together a committee to be able to to create a Quran, but there was a problem. There were already numerous variations amongst written accounts of the Quran. So Uthman, his team, put together an authorized Quran, if you will, and he commanded all variants to be burned or boiled into water, destroyed. Now, the Muslim will say that the New Testament, there's variants out there. As the copyist would copy Ephesians or Galatians, that copies would have errors that would come in the copy. The Quran, there are no errors. They all read exactly the same. No, the Quran that we have is the Quran that Uthman wanted us to have. All the variants were burned. The evidence was lost and destroyed. It must be recited in Arabic. Even to this day, there's a heavy emphasis on reciting the Quran. It's still a book of recitation. You can go on YouTube and watch people, like in contests, reciting the Quran by memory. Correct pronunciation is very important. Recited in Arabic, and any interpretation, any translation is merely an interpretation. This is an English translation of the Quran. There's several reputable ones out there. You have Yusuf Ali's translation, which I usually use. This is the Dawood translation, very good translation. But any Muslim is going to tell me I'm not really holding a Quran because it's English. The true Quran must be in Arabic. Any translation is actually merely an interpretation. Well, how do Muslims worship? Let me talk about the practice of Islam, how Muslims worship. This is very important. We're going to see this evening that there's a heavy emphasis on practices and ritual. We're going to see this evening the emphasis on Islam, my experience with it. There's a much heavier emphasis on orthopraxy over orthodoxy. Now, orthopraxy is what a person does. Orthopraxy seems to overrule orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is what you believe. Now, for Christians, our emphasis is more on orthodoxy because we're saved by faith. So it's extremely important that we're believing the right things because our salvation comes through faith. In Islam, it's switched over. The emphasis is not so much on what you're thinking or believing, but doing the things correctly. And that takes us to the 5 pillars. If you're taking notes, pillar number 1 is Shahada. Shahada is the declaration. Now, this must be recited in Arabic. You say, well, what if you don't know Arabic? A Muslim will help you. They will say this after me. You must learn Shahada. I'm going to give you the English translation. Roughly, it says this. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Sometimes you'll hear it say Muhammad is the seal of the prophet or the final prophet. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. When a person converts to Islam, reverts to Islam, the way you do it is by reciting Shahada, or they call it taking Shahada. In fact, you can go on YouTube and just put in taking Shahada, and you can see hundreds of videos on YouTube of people coming up in public where a Muslim cleric or an imam will have them take Shahada, repeat after me, and say in Arabic, the Shahada, there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet, and they will become, at that point, a pure Muslim. Interestingly, in the class I teach at Criswell College on Islam, at a certain point towards the end of the semester, I want my students to meet Muslims. I don't want to just to read in a textbook or hear what their professor tells them. I want them to meet real Muslims. So I bring in a number of Muslims, Shia, Sunni. I even brought in the minister of the Nation of Islam, Jeffrey Mohammed, personally mentored by Louis Farrakhan. I'll tell you about that one day. That was maybe a mistake. But anyway, I did bring in another guy who I've used before. I've known for several years. And that's Hassan Khalil, who is the imam of the Sunni mosque in Arlington, Texas, where I live. And I brought him into the class, and here's the ground rules. I say for 30 minutes, you can tell my students anything that you want. You can correct misunderstandings. You can tell them why you're a Muslim. You can tell them whatever you want. But for the next 45 minutes, my students may ask you any question they want. Nothing out of bounds. Now, I've already told my students that you must be respectful. See, my students have all week to prepare their questions. They must be respectful questions, but I want hard-hitting, thought-provoking questions. So the next week rolled around, and of course, I'm grading my students on the quality of their questions. You understand that? So the next week rolled around, and Hassan came in, and he was dressed in his Islamic clothing and began to share what he believed about Islam. So it comes up for the question time. And let me say, this man is very frank, very straightforward. So he had already told our students that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not trustworthy. They've been changed. They've been altered. If you really want to know the gospel, you need to go to the best surviving gospel, which is the gospel of Barnabas. Now, of course, my students already knew that the Gospel of Barnabas was a medieval forgery written hundreds and hundreds of years after the first century and could not have been written by the Barnabas of the New Testament, who had been dead for centuries, so they knew that. But one of my students asked his question. He asked the imam, "You understand that you are at a Bible college. We are here, we've given our lives to study the Word of God, to learn what the Bible says. Now you tell us the Bible's corrupt and that it's mistaken. Are you saying that we have made a mistake by coming here to the college?" The Muslim imam looked and he said, "Let me ask you, my friend, do you want me to tell you the nice answer, or do you want me to tell you the true answer?" My student said, "I want the true answer." He said, "You are all of you wasting your time. This is, if you want to get to God, you do not do it through here or through the Bible. You become Muslim. I want you to repeat after me." And he gives Shahada in Arabic. Now, hey, I'd already told my students, you can ask any question that you want. But if any of you convert, automatic F. You will fail the course if any of you. They knew not to do that. Well, that's the first pillar, Shahada. The second pillar is Salat. These are the 5 daily prayers. Now, the prayers of Salat are not prayers in the sense that like we would pray and ask God to show us His will in a certain area, or ask for help in a certain area of our life, or pray for a sick loved one or something like that. Now, Muslims will pray that way, but that's not the 5 daily prayers, what they call the obligatory prayers, or salat. These prayers, there's an emphasis on doing it the correct way. You must go through a ceremonial washing. You must be dressed in the proper attire. You must do the bowing in the correct order, in the correct way. The prayers must be given by memory in Arabic. Your head must touch the forehead. The emphasis again on orthopraxy over orthodoxy. Some of the earliest memories, even of children who have grown up in Muslim families, is learning the daily prayers, the salat. The third pillar is Psalm. The Psalm is the fast. On the 9th lunar month, which is Ramadan, the Muslim must fast during the daylight hours. No food, no water either. No food or drink during daylight hours. As soon as the sun goes down, the fast is broken. And brings us to pillar number 4, zakat. Zakat are the alms, or the giving, the donations. Let me just read from the Quran if I can. This is from Surah means chapter, Surah 960. Charity shall go to the poor, the needy, the workers who collect them, the new converts, to free the slaves, to those burdened by sudden expenses in the cause of God, and to the traveling alien. Such is God's commandments. God is omniscient, most wise. Surah 960, zakat. Now, the zakat is 2.5% of your wealth, not of your income, of your wealth. It's annual. And the responsibility of zakat is not just to collect the zakat. There's also a responsibility for the Muslim community to make sure it goes and is properly spent to help those who are truly in need, the oppressed, the widows, etc. In countries that are predominant Muslim, that are controlled by Sharia law, you have the zakat tax is actually handled by the government. They will take the money out and pass it on and make sure that it is spent correctly. Takes us to the 5th pillar, which is the Hajj. The Hajj is the pilgrimage. It's the duty and responsibility of every Muslim at least one time in their life. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Even with the fast, there's the Ramadan, there's exceptions for the traveler or someone who's physically ill. Similarly, with the Hajj, if you cannot physically go or you cannot afford to go, you're too poor, then there is an exemption. But any able-bodied Muslim who can afford to do so must, at least once in their life, go on the Hajj. They must travel during the 12th lunar month to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca, to the Grand Mosque, where they will reenact some of the events that took place in the life of Muhammad and the other prophets. They will go through a ritual reenactment of drinking from the well of Zamzam. There's a portion where they will pick up pebbles and throw it at some pillars representing the stoning of the devil. There's other things that happen, but maybe the most unique thing that you will see happen deals with a structure called the Kaaba. In the Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia, there's a black cube-shaped structure called the Kaaba. Now, this goes back to Muhammad. In Saudi Arabia, or Mecca, the Kaaba, according to Muhammad, was originally built by Abraham to worship the one true God. But by Muhammad's time, in the 7th century, the whole thing had been given over to polytheism and idolatry. And so there were some 360 idols, gods that were actually stored in this Kaaba. And so what happened is when Muhammad returned to Mecca, to conquer Mecca from Medina, he was able to liberate the Kaaba and reverse it back to its original purpose, which has to do with the Hajj, of worshiping the true God, Allah. And so what happens is a number of things happen. There's a stone in the corner, a black stone in the corner that's supposed to go all the way back to Adam and Eve. And what happens is the Muslims, and I don't know if you can tell from the picture, those are people, millions of them. They will, what they call circumambulate. They will go counterclockwise 7 times around the Kaaba, and every time they go by the stone, they're to kiss the stone. Obviously, that can't happen, or at least point to the stone. So this is part of what they call the Hajj. Well, heaven and hell lay in the balance of the 5 pillars. Your eternal life is in the destiny. Muslims very much believe in heaven, a literal paradise, and a literal hell. There's graphic descriptions in the Quran of hell. And heaven and hell are in the balance. They believe that Allah on the judgment day, and this is a prime doctrine of Islam, that there's going to be a day of judgment. And Allah is going to put all your good works on one side of the scale and all of your bad works on the other side of the scale. But wait a minute. Even before you get there, something else has to happen first. First of all, anyone you've ever done anything wrong to is going to stand in line and ask for a restitution. So if you have harmed somebody, lied to someone, cheated them out of money, if you've hurt their feelings, anyone you've done anything wrong to, they're going to stand in line to talk with you before the scales are weighed. Now, for some of you, that line's going to be longer than others. And each person is going to come up. Remember when you slighted me? Remember when you did this wrong? I want some of your good deeds. So you'll negotiate, and then you will give them some of your good deeds. And only when the line is completely over and you've given out the good deeds to everyone you've harmed, then Allah puts the good deeds on one side of the scale and the bad deeds on the other. Which will outweigh the other? Well, obviously, when you're trying to serve a God by works like this, you never know if you've done enough. You can ask any Muslim, if you were to die right now, would you go to the paradise or would you go to hell? No Muslim knows. They hope so. They're trying for it. They try to be devout. But you'll hear this regularly, the will of Allah. Only Allah knows. It's the will of Allah. Allah's merciful, so hopefully. But you don't know. It's the scales of justice. So you have the 5 pillars, Shahada, Salat, Psalm, Zakat, and the pilgrimage, the Hajj. But the question this evening is there a 6th pillar? What about Jihad? Is there a 6th pillar? Now, this is controversial. But let me say, every Muslim does believe in Jihad. Now, that does not mean every Muslim is a terrorist. The word Jihad means struggle. And every Muslim does believe that they are involved in a struggle. You may have seen the political cartoon where the Muslim says, "Ignore him, my friend, Mr. Jihad. He's only a mirage." But is Jihad only a mirage? No, it's not. It's a primary doctrine. Now, it's not technically a 6th pillar, but it's extremely important. What does Jihad mean? Most of us became familiar with the term Jihad after the events of September 11th. And when the planes flew into the New York, to the Trade Center, when they flew into the Pentagon, when we saw people dying, we heard that this was a jihad, a holy war, and we wondered, why do they hate us so? Why do Muslims hate the people in the West, the people in America? Well, let me say, most Muslims do not hate the people of the West. Jihad, there are several meanings for the word jihad. According to one of the hadiths, Muhammad was returning from a great battle. One of his warriors said, "Isn't it wonderful that Allah gave us this great victory in this great jihad?" And according to the hadith, Muhammad corrected him and said, "No, the battle where we fight, that is the lesser jihad. The greater jihad is the struggle that every Muslim faces in trying to submit properly to Allah." So there's different meanings for the term jihad. Now, you should know right up front that there's a greater and a lesser jihad. Most Muslims in the world do not see jihad as terrorism. Now, that's what's in the news. That's what we see. But especially here in the United States, most Muslims would not look at jihad as meaning that they need to be terrorists or they need to kill people. They do not interpret the Quran that way. You say, well, I can show you in the Quran, I can take you to the sword passages, Surah 9:5, for example, where the Quran specifically says that you're to kill the infidel, slay them, hunt them down, the non-believer. That's me. Well, now, let me say this. If you have a Muslim friend